We have uncovered so many important structures that prove this temple functioned as a temple during the time of Queen Cleopatra and the Greek pharaohs.
They told you she was the most beautiful woman who ever lived. They told you she seduced the most powerful men in history with nothing but a glance and a smile. They told you she was a goddess walking on earth, a queen so magnetic, so untouchable, that the whole Roman Empire shook at the sound of her name. History gave you Cleopatra, the legend, the icon, the myth. But science just handed us something else entirely. Something that does not fit on a movie poster. Something that does not belong in a love story. New forensic analysis, advanced DNA sequencing, and decades of obsessive archaeological work are pulling back the curtain on the real Cleopatra. And what is underneath is not beautiful. It is not romantic. It is, in the most clinical and honest sense of the word, terrifying. Because the clues were never buried. They were hiding in plain sight the whole time. In her family tree, in her bloodline, in the bones of the dead buried around her. You just needed to know where to look. And now, we do. So forget the golden headdress, forget Elizabeth Taylor, forget every painting and every marble bust you have ever seen. What we are about to tell you is not the story of a beautiful queen. It is the story of a biological war, a woman fighting a battle that was written into her DNA before she ever drew her first breath. And the terrifying part? She may have been losing the whole time. She just never let it show. The tomb at the edge of the world. For 2,000 years, Egypt's sands have been keeping one secret above all others. Not the pyramids, not the Sphinx. The final resting place of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh, the last true ruler of an ancient civilization that had stood for 3,000 years. Most scholars will tell you she is gone, lost. They say Alexandria swallowed her. They point to rising sea levels, centuries of earthquakes, the relentless expansion of a modern city built right on top of the ancient one. They say she is under a highway, or under a hotel, or under the sea. They say it is over. One woman looked at all of that evidence and said, "You are looking in the wrong place." Her name is Kathleen Martinez, and she is not like other archaeologists. She is a criminal defense lawyer from the Dominican Republic who pivoted to archaeology with one singular obsession: finding Cleopatra. While academics debated theory in conference rooms, Martinez went to the desert and started digging. She did not treat this like a history problem. She treated it like a cold case. She studied Cleopatra's psychology, her political motives, her religious convictions. She built a behavioral profile, and that profile led her away from Alexandria, 30 miles west, to a crumbling ancient temple complex called Taposiris Magna. Nobody else was looking there, for good reason. On the surface, it looks like a ruin, a shell of a building, wind-beaten stone baking under an unforgiving sun. But in 2022, beneath that ruin, Martinez and her team found something that stopped every expert in their tracks. A tunnel, not a crawl space, not a drainage ditch, a full tunnel, carved through solid bedrock, stretching over 4,300 feet, nearly a mile, 6 feet high, running 40 feet below the surface, partially submerged in water and thick ancient mud. It cuts through the earth like a knife and heads straight toward the Mediterranean Sea. Structural engineers who examined it were stunned. They called it a geometric miracle. The precision of the carving, the angle of the descent, the sheer scale of the thing. It mirrors a legendary ancient engineering feat, the Tunnel of Eupalinos in Greece, one of the most celebrated construction achievements of the ancient world. This was not built for storage. You do not carve a mile-long subterranean passage 40 feet underground for minor reasons. This kind of construction implies one thing above everything else: extreme importance, extreme secrecy, something, or someone, that could never be found. Off the coast nearby, underwater surveys have revealed the remains of a sunken ancient port. This was not an abandoned outpost. It was a hub, a place of movement, of power, of significance. Martinez believes the tunnel leads somewhere specific, somewhere final, somewhere that has been sealed and silent for over 2,000 years. She believes she is standing at the front door of Cleopatra's tomb. She has not opened it yet, but what she has found just inside the entrance has already rewritten what we thought we knew about this place, and about the queen who may have chosen it. The Court of Whispers. Inside the Taposiris Magna complex, before the tunnel even reveals its final secret, the team began finding burials, not scattered graves, not incidental deaths, deliberate, intentional, ceremonial tombs. 16 of them, cut directly into the rock. At first glance, they looked like elite burials, wealthy individuals, maybe priests, maybe merchants. But then, the archaeologists leaned in closer, and they saw what was resting inside the mouths of the dead. Gold. Thin sheets of gold foil, pressed into the shape of tongues, placed where the real tongue had been. These are known as golden tongue amulets, and in ancient Egyptian belief, they carry enormous significance. Here is the theology. In the afterlife, the soul of the deceased had to stand before Osiris, the Lord of the dead, and speak. It had to plead its case. It had to argue for its own worthiness to pass through. If you could not speak, if your voice had been taken by death, you were condemned. The golden tongue was the solution. It was a ritual substitute, a magical voice made of precious metal. It gave the dead the ability to speak with what the ancient texts called golden eloquence, the power to address a god. Now, here is the question Martinez could not stop asking. Why are they here? Why are these 16 carefully prepared, gold-tongued individuals buried at this specific location? Her answer sends a chill straight through you. She believes these were not random aristocrats. They were courtiers. They were members of Cleopatra's inner circle, men and women who served her in life and were prepared to serve her in death. They were buried here, equipped with divine voices for one specific purpose: to announce the arrival of their queen before the throne of Osiris. Think about what that means structurally. You do not build a royal reception hall in the underworld for a minor official. You build it for a pharaoh. The courtiers come first. The queen comes after. If the court is already in place, already equipped and waiting, then the one they are waiting for is close. We are not digging through a graveyard. We are standing in a royal vestibule. And if Martinez is right about the tunnel, the throne room is just beyond the next wall. The wrong body. While Martinez hunts for Cleopatra's actual bones beneath Taposiris Magna, science has been working a different angle entirely. Because we thought we already had a window into Cleopatra's genetics. We thought we had found someone who shared her blood. We thought we had her sister. Arsinoe IV was the most dangerous person in Cleopatra's world. Not Caesar, not Octavian, her own sister. When Cleopatra was driven into exile, it was Arsinoe who stepped up and claimed the throne. When Julius Caesar sailed into Alexandria and got himself trapped in the royal palace, it was Arsinoe who commanded the Egyptian army against him. She was a teenager, and she nearly won. The Roman crowds who watched her march through Rome in chains, a teenage girl in shackles, paraded as a war trophy, actually wept for her. That sympathy bought her life. Caesar spared her and sent her into exile at the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus, in what is now Turkey. Holy ground, sanctuary. She believed she was safe. She was not. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra sent word to Mark Antony. The message was simple. Arsinoe is a threat. She has to die. Antony obliged. He sent men to the temple steps. They dragged Arsinoe out and killed her in front of the altar. It was a scandal that shook the ancient world, the murder of a princess on sacred ground. But for us, 2,000 years later, it gave us something precious, a location. In the early 20th century, archaeologists excavating Ephesus found an unusual tomb, octagonal in shape, a heroon, a burial reserved for individuals of semi-divine status, heroes, and royals. Inside was a skeleton, young, the age matched, the location matched, the timeline matched. Scholars were almost certain this was Arsinoe IV. This was Cleopatra's murdered sister. And if it was Arsinoe, we had Cleopatra's genetic map. Same mother, same bloodline, same dynasty. We could read her ethnicity, her health, her ancestry. We thought we had the key. Then, in 2022, a team from the University of Vienna tracked down the skull from that Ephesus tomb. It had been sitting in a university archive, uncatalogued, for decades. They ran it through micro-CT scanning, the kind of technology that builds three-dimensional maps of bone density, structure, and cellular composition. Then they drilled into the petrous temporal bone, the hardest, most DNA-preserving part of the entire human skull. The results were published in January 2025, and they were not what anyone expected. The skeleton is not Arsinoe. It is not a 20-year-old woman. It is not a princess of African descent. The DNA extracted from that bone contains a Y chromosome. The body in the octagon tomb is male, an adolescent boy, estimated between 11 and 14 years old, and it gets stranger. The micro-CT scans revealed severe developmental abnormalities, an asymmetrical skull, a stunted, misaligned jaw, bone structure consistent with conditions like Treacher-Collins syndrome, or advanced rickets. This was a child whose body had been shaped by genetic illness, visibly, significantly, devastatingly. His genetic markers trace back not to Egypt, not to the Ptolemaic world, but to Italy, possibly Sardinia. So, who is he? Why was a sick, deformed Italian boy buried in one of the most prestigious tombs in the ancient Mediterranean world? Was he a political secret, a child of Roman and Ptolemaic blood whose existence was too dangerous to acknowledge? A ritual sacrifice? A scapegoat? Nobody knows. But here is what is now definitively clear. The scientific argument that this skeleton proved Cleopatra had African heritage was built entirely on wrong bones. The identification was wrong. The DNA belonged to someone else completely. And the story science told using those bones about Cleopatra's ethnicity, her appearance, her lineage, collapses. We are back to the historical record. And the historical record tells a different kind of horror story. A family that ate itself. To understand what Cleopatra's DNA might actually contain, you have to understand the dynasty that produced her. And the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt is one of the most extreme genetic experiments in recorded human history. They were Greeks, descendants of one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy I, who seized Egypt after Alexander's death. They ruled as pharaohs, adopted Egyptian religion and titles, but kept their Greek bloodline fiercely, obsessively, pathologically intact. How? By marrying each other, not cousins. Siblings, full biological siblings, sharing both parents, marrying each other, and producing children together, generation after generation. It was not a scandal among the Ptolemies. It was policy. A deliberate, religiously justified, politically enforced policy of keeping the bloodline in a closed loop. Cleopatra's own parents, Ptolemy XII and Cleopatra V, are believed by most historians to have been full brother and sister. Her grandparents before them likely involved uncle-niece or sibling marriages as well. The branches of this family tree did not spread outward toward new genetic material. They bent inward, folded back on themselves, collapsed. Geneticists have a term for this, pedigree collapse, and they have a number that measures its severity, the coefficient of inbreeding. In a normal family tree, the coefficient for a child of two first cousins is approximately 6%. That is already considered medically significant, enough to raise the risk of recessive genetic disorders. The Habsburg dynasty of Spain, who practiced close kin marriage for generations, produced a lineage with a coefficient around 20 to 25% in their most extreme cases. Estimates for Cleopatra place her coefficient at over 45%. Let that number sit for a moment, nearly double the Habsburg worst case. You want to know what 45% inbreeding did to the Habsburgs? It produced Charles II of Spain. They called him the Bewitched. He could not speak until he was 4 years old, could not walk until he was 8. His jaw was so severely overdeveloped, the famous Habsburg jaw, taken to its furthest extreme, that his upper and lower teeth could not meet. He could not chew. He swallowed his food whole, his entire life. He suffered seizures, infertility, and cognitive decline. Physicians who examined him after his death at age 38 reported that his body had wasted to almost nothing, that his heart was described as the size of a peppercorn. Charles II had a coefficient of approximately 25%. Cleopatra was nearly double that. By every statistical model we have, she should have been Charles II times 2. She should have been visibly deformed, physically fragile, cognitively impaired. She should have been the end of her line, which, technically, she was. But she was not supposed to be brilliant. She was not supposed to be a linguist who spoke 9 languages. She was not supposed to be the diplomatic genius who managed the most powerful empire in the world from a position of nominal weakness. So what happened? The curse written in the blood. Here is how inbreeding works at the molecular level, and why it is so dangerous. Your DNA is a collaboration. Every person carries 2 copies of each gene, one from their mother, one from their father. When those 2 copies are different, one carrying a potentially harmful recessive mutation, the other carrying a healthy dominant version, the healthy version wins. It masks the flaw. It covers the weakness. Your genetic diversity is literally your genetic insurance. But when both parents are closely related, they carry the same recessive mutations, the same flaws. There is no healthy copy coming from the other side. Both versions of the gene are damaged. The flaw expresses itself fully, completely, without anything to buffer it. Scientists call this homozygosity, when both copies of a gene are identical. High levels of it, driven by inbreeding, are associated with suppressed immune function, developmental abnormalities, metabolic disorders, autoimmune diseases, reduced fertility, shortened lifespan, and a range of cognitive and physical disabilities. In the Ptolemaic family, the evidence of these effects is not abstract. It is documented in historical records that, read through a medical lens, read like a clinical case file. Look at Ptolemy VIII Physcon, Cleopatra's great-granduncle, and given the compressed circular nature of the family tree, also a close genetic mirror. His nickname tells you something. Physcon translates roughly as potbelly, but the ancient sources describing him go far beyond that. They describe a man who was morbidly obese, not just overweight, but incapacitated by his own body. His limbs were too weak to carry his own mass. He had to be physically supported by attendants when he walked. Sources note a prominently swollen neck, protruding eyes, and chronic shortness of breath. Modern medical historians looking at this description see something specific. They see Graves's disease, an autoimmune disorder in which the immune system attacks the thyroid gland, causing it to overproduce thyroid hormone. The physical signs are distinctive: the bulging eyes, the goiter, the swollen neck, and the behavioral effects are just as significant. Graves's disease floods the body with excess thyroid hormone. The result is a state of chronic physiological hyperactivation, racing heart, inability to sleep, compulsive, frantic energy, rapid, pressured speech, impulsive, high-stakes decision-making, emotional volatility that can tip, in severe cases, into something resembling mania. Now read back through what ancient historians wrote about Cleopatra. They wrote that she had boundless energy, that she worked through the night when others collapsed, that she moved constantly, spoke brilliantly and rapidly, made decisions with electric speed. They called it charisma. They called it genius. They called it the divine fire of Isis. Medical anthropologists are now asking a different question. What if it was a thyroid storm? What if what we interpreted as supernatural brilliance was actually a symptom? A genetic condition passed down through generations of Ptolemaic inbreeding, presenting in Cleopatra not as the grotesque deformity it caused in Physcon, but as a kind of supercharged hyperfunctionality that looked, from the outside, like greatness. It is a terrifying reframe, because it means the fire that drove her may not have been a gift. It may have been a disease, and diseases, unlike gifts, come with a price: the mask she wore. If Cleopatra was living in a body under constant biological siege, joints inflamed from the same metabolic disorders that plagued Physcon, a thyroid gland misfiring and flooding her system with excess hormone, immune function compromised by decades of inbreeding, then the question is not just how she functioned. The question is how she hid it, because she did hide it. Whatever was happening beneath the surface, the image Cleopatra projected to the world was one of divine radiance, untouchable, luminous, perfectly composed. She was not just performing power, she was engineering it. Start with her pharmacy. Egypt, in the 1st century BCE, was not just the wealthiest country in the Mediterranean. It was the pharmaceutical capital of the ancient world. The Nile Delta produced opium from enormous poppy fields. It produced cannabis, mandrake, henbane, blue lotus, and dozens of other psychoactive and analgesic compounds. Egyptian doctors were the most sophisticated in the world, and their queen had access to everything they knew. If her joints ached, and with an inbreeding coefficient twice that of the worst Habsburg case, the odds of early-onset inflammatory arthritis were significant, she had opium, the ancient world's most effective painkiller, enough to smooth away the ache in her bones so she could stand straight during 5-hour diplomatic receptions, enough to keep the grimace off her face when she needed to project strength. If the thyroid disease gave her insomnia and a racing mind that would not quiet, a documented symptom of Graves's disease that can make sleep feel physically impossible, she had kaifi, a complex ritual incense burned in Egyptian temples, made from a combination of resins, herbs, and aromatic compounds with known sedative properties. Ancient texts describe its scent as something that loosened the knots of the day and eased the body toward rest. For a woman possibly trembling with unspent thyroid energy every time she tried to lie down, kaifi was not luxury, it was medication. And if she wanted the floating, euphoric, magnetically pleasant social affect that made everyone in a room gravitate toward her, that legendary charisma that made Caesar and Antony and the entire Roman Senate feel like she was somehow not quite human. She had blue lotus, a mild psychoactive flower, regularly steeped in wine, that produces a state of warm, expansive euphoria, not intoxication, enhancement. We talk about Cleopatra's charisma as though it descended from the heavens. What if it was a recipe? What if she walked into every high-stakes political meeting running on a precise combination of pain management, sedation, and carefully calibrated euphoria, a pharmaceutical cocktail designed to let her body perform at a level her genetics alone could not sustain? Then there is the cosmetics. We know Cleopatra wrote a book, not a political treatise, not a military manual, a book on cosmetics called Cosmeticon, referenced and quoted by physicians including Galen, who was writing more than a century after her death. This is not a minor detail. This is a queen who found the science of appearance important enough to research, document, and publish. Why? If Graves's disease ran in her blood, and Physcon is strong evidence that it did, one of its most visible symptoms is exophthalmos. The eyes bulge forward, noticeably, unnervingly. The ancient Egyptian fashion for heavy, dramatic eye cosmetics, bold kohl lines extending far past the outer corners of the eyes, has always been framed as cultural tradition. But medical anthropologists now suggest it may also have served a specific optical function, visually reshaping eyes that protruded abnormally, redirecting the viewer's attention, reframing the gaze. Similarly, if she carried even a hint of the goiter that visibly swelled Physcon's neck, her legendary elaborate collar jewelry, wide, heavy, layered necklaces that spread across the chest and up the neck, may not have been pure fashion. It may have been concealment. She was possibly the world's first documented biohacker, a woman who took a body that was genetically compromised from its first breath and, through chemistry, botany, cosmetics, and sheer force of studied intelligence, transformed it into the most politically effective instrument in the ancient world. The image the world saw was not the body she lived in. It was the body she built. What the dirt will tell us. And this is why the tunnel under Taposiris Magna matters more now than it ever has. When Kathleen Martinez first began pushing into that limestone complex 20 years ago, the goal was romantic. Find the lost queen, restore the legend, give history back its most famous face. But science has changed the stakes entirely. If Martinez breaks through that final wall, if the ground-penetrating radar resolves into something solid, if the mud-choked tunnel opens into a sealed chamber, if there is a sarcophagus in the dark, what she finds will not just be a queen. It will be a medical archive unlike anything ever recovered from the ancient world. A skeleton with a 45% inbreeding coefficient, preserved in the dry Egyptian climate, treated with the embalming techniques of the most sophisticated mortuary culture in history, would be a genomic goldmine. We could sequence her actual DNA, not a sister's, not a proxy's, hers. We could finally answer the questions that have haunted this story for 2 millennia. What was her actual ethnicity? The Ptolemies were Greek, but royal lines rarely stay perfectly pure. Affairs, alliances, the quiet introduction of Egyptian or African blood over 3 centuries of ruling Egypt. Her genome would tell us. We could identify the specific genetic mutations she carried, see which diseases were active in her system, map the exact biological cost of generations of Ptolemaic inbreeding, determine whether she showed skeletal evidence of inflammatory joint disease, thyroid abnormality, or the metabolic disorders that bent and broke her ancestors. We could look at her teeth. Tooth enamel is one of the most durable biological records a body produces. Isotopic analysis of enamel can tell us where she spent her childhood, what she ate, whether her diet changed dramatically during periods of stress. We could read the years of her life in the mineral rings of her molars. We could look at her skull. The same micro-CT technology that unmasked the boy in Ephesus could map every millimeter of her facial architecture. Not an artist's reconstruction based on coins, her actual bone structure, the real proportions of the real face, and we may not recognize what we see. If the inbreeding played out the way genetics says it should have, the way it did in Physcon, the way it did in Charles II of Spain, she may have been visibly affected. The jaw, the eyes, the overall proportions of a face shaped by generations of genetic compression. Not a monster, but not the Hollywood ideal either. Or, and this is the other possibility, the one that keeps historians awake, the genome may show something unexpected. A rare combination. a genetic roll of the dice so improbable that it threaded through all the inbreeding unscathed, and produced exactly what the ancient sources described: a woman of unusual vitality, luminous presence, and devastating intelligence. The technology is ready. The DNA sequencers are waiting. The ground-penetrating radar has already found anomalies in the bedrock beneath the temple complex that have not yet been excavated. Martinez is closer than she has ever been, and closer than anyone else has ever been. The last pharaoh has been keeping her secrets for 2,000 years. The tunnel runs silent. The sarcophagus, if it exists, has not been touched since the hands that sealed it turned to dust. But the seal is not eternal, and the wait is almost over. Here is where we have to be honest with ourselves. When we go looking for Cleopatra, what are we actually hoping to find? Are we looking for confirmation, another piece of evidence that the legend is real, that beauty and brilliance can coexist in one perfect human being, that history got this one right? Or are we brave enough to look for the truth, even if the truth is harder? Because here is what science is now telling us the truth might look like. It might look like a woman who was in pain, a woman whose body was quietly losing a genetic war that started 3 generations before she was born. A woman who woke up every day, managed her symptoms with the best pharmaceutical toolkit the ancient world had to offer, painted a divine mask over whatever her mirror showed her, and then walked into a room full of the most powerful men on earth and made every single one of them feel like she was the only person in the room. A woman who wrote a book about cosmetics not because she was vain, but because she was strategic. A woman whose legendary charisma may have been partially engineered. A woman whose boundless energy may have been a thyroid disorder she had learned to ride rather than resist. Does that make her less impressive, or does it make her the most impressive person in this entire story? Because any general can be brave when the armies are equal. Any diplomat can be charming when they feel good, but to walk into the halls of Rome, the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, in a body that was genetically compromised, chemically supplemented, cosmetically armored, and scientifically managed, and to make Rome bend to your will anyway, that is not luck. That is not divine favor. That is not beauty. That is will. Cold, calculated, ferocious will. The legend told us she was a goddess. The science tells us she was something rarer. A human being who refused to be defeated by her own biology. If they open that tomb tomorrow, and the face staring back at us looks nothing like what we were promised, if it looks like someone who fought hard and showed the marks of the fight, do we revise the story downward? Or do we finally understand that the story was never about her face? It was always about what she did with what she had. Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this changed how you see her, even slightly, hit like and subscribe, because history is full of stories like this one, and we are just getting started.